Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at Airfix's new release this morning. That is the Me410. So I won't keep you waiting, let's have a look at it. This video was made possible by Jadlam Toys and Models. They are a UK based company trusted by over 30,000 people. They offer a superb variety of stock, from the newest releases to the all-time greats, all at a very competitive price. Furthermore, they offer free tracks postage on all of your orders to ensure they get there quickly and securely. You can also make use of their loyalty reward scheme where you can cash in J points for discounts on future purchases. Be sure to check them out using the link in the description to find out more. Thank you. So, as is the normal on these sort of kits, we're going to be starting off in the cockpit. As per the instructions, the first thing that I had to do was get out my trusty pin vise and drill out 1 or 2 holes. These are going to be used to hold a part in the underneath gun bay, which I'm sure you'll see in a sec. As you can see on screen, there was also a small piece of glass which had to be masked off before being cemented into the floor of the cockpit. The one piece gun bay can then be cemented on top of that before turning my attention back to the upper half of the cockpit by putting in a couple of bulkheads and other bits and bobs. The detail in this kit really did catch me off guard, as it is 1/72 scale, so I was expecting some quite simplified details. However, that really wasn't the case. As you could see on that clip, either side of the cockpit control panels have some really nicely moulded details, such as buttons, switches, etc. Moving back onto what you can see on screen, here I am just fitting one of the seats in place. Both of the seats are really crisply moulded, and also it's nice to note that they're made out of one piece. This eliminates any seams that you have to clean up, which I was very happy about. Another thing which I really enjoyed at this part of the build was the build flow. The Me410 has quite a complicated and intricate interior, and I thought in 1/72 scale it could be hard not to make it too over-engineered and too complicated to put together. However, Airfix definitely had a plan on how they wanted to put this together, and they executed it perfectly. Really enjoyable part of the build, this. Going back to what's on screen here, you can see me building up the navigator or the weapon operator sort of seat. I'm not too sure what the technical name of this position would be. However, it builds up really quickly, really simply out of 1 or 2 pieces. The one thing that I would say as a criticism of this part of the build would be I'm not too convinced on the attachment point of this seat. It feels like it could be quite fragile and flimsy and very easy to knock off. So take your time here, be careful, potentially use some super glue, some CA glue, just to give it a really good bond. After 1 or 2 little sidewall pieces have been put on, I can then move on to the first bit of paint for this build, and that is going to be the interior grey. I'm going to be using XF24, debatably a little bit too dark of a grey for this. However, I plan to use a dusty wash to try and lighten up the colour, so bear with me with this. This was sprayed onto the model at around about 15 psi with my 0.3mm Harder and Steenbeck Evolution airbrush. On a different note, I wish I could give you a thinning ratio that I used for the paint, but unfortunately I'm pretty sure I just used my eyesight to kind of eye up to that milk consistency. After it all smoothly dried and I was happy with how it looked, I can do a little bit of detail painting. This I'm going to use a variety of colours, yellow, white, red, black, just to pick out the details on the control panels. It's good to note that you don't have to detail paint these, you can use the kit supplied decals. However, I thought the detail was there, so I might as well have a go at picking it all out. Here was the result, and I was really quite happy with how it looked, especially as it's 1/72 scale. I can now seal everything in using Tamiya's X22 Clear. This was my first time using the varnish, however I was really happy with the results. It gave me a really nice base to use Ammo Mig's light grey wash to give that slightly dusty and lighter effect that I was looking for. This was very simply just kind of dotted on and letting capillary action do all the work to bring that wash into all of the recessed regions of the cockpit, of which there are many. My main goal for this wash was really to just highlight a lot of those details and make them a little bit easier to pick out with your eyes when you're looking through the canopy. As there is not an option to open up the canopy on this kit, which is understandable as it's quite complex, it makes it, you can kind of over accentuate a couple of those details. Any excess wash was pretty much swiped up using my cotton bud here. This was doused in a really small bit of white spirit, just a little bit dampened, and then it will pull all of it up. I can now seal everything in using X21 flat base. I had a little bit of an issue with this where it slightly reacted to give it a little bit too light of an effect. However, I don't think it really matters too much. The mask can be taken off before cementing the main assembly to one side of the fuselage. There's a really nice raised locating system which makes sure that this assembly is in the correct place. Pay very careful attention to the instructions in this part of the build, as you have to make sure that this hub is on one side of the fuselage before they get cemented together. If not, you won't have any place to attach your little side mounted machine guns, so be careful and you'll be fine. So now going on to have a little look at the actual wing assembly, I'm going to be cementing this wing spar in place. I'm not too sure what the real reason for this is. I guess it is potentially to increase the rigidity of the wing. I don't think it needed it, but I guess it's nice that it's there. This pretty much slots into place, as you can see, with two raised sort of sections where it slots into. I'd make sure to cement or put quite a bit of cement in these regions here, as it really helps to cement it in place and make sure it doesn't flex out of any of the joins. So Fat Fingers over here had a little bit of an issue trying to get them in place, and that is just because I guess my hand-eye coordination is pretty shocking. However, once it does slot into place, it is quite a nice satisfying click, and it is very snugly in there. The last little piece which you have to put in before everything can start to come together, and that is this sort of anchor point or glue point for the tail wheel. This just slots into place really nicely, and now everything can start to come together. So it's quite a simple mechanism. The main fuselage just kind of slots on top of the main wing. However, it's been executed really well by Airfix. You know, there's definitely potential for measurements not to line up here and potentially cause you some issues. However, really nice sort of join here, so you're not going to have any issues. So now looking at the upper half of the wing, this is a really nice fit once again. It has not a huge seam between the fuselage and the main heart or upper half of the wing, so you wouldn't really have to sort much out here. So really nice again. Moving on here, you can see me putting in the slats. It is really nice that these are, or the extended slats are molded as one piece instead of having to do another, maybe one or two sub-assemblies to create the effect. So nice feature, never seen it done before, so well done Airfix. Here you can see me putting in the one piece vertical stabilizer. I always prefer it when it's one piece, just means there's not a seam to kind of get in place. So another nice touch. The horizontal stabilizers have not an incredible fit. They do take a little bit of a mucking around to get in place, but once they are in, you're absolutely fine. So now moving on to fitting the iconic huge gun out the front of the Me410. It's really nicely molded. I did use a drill bit to drill out the front portion of it to, make it look a little bit more realistic. There was also this small gap, as you can see on screen. I'm not too sure if it was meant to be there, as it was quite a uniform gap, so potentially I've just filled it in for no reason. However, it was sorted out just using a small strip of a styrene card, and yeah, it was sorted in a matter of 5 minutes, so not a huge issue at all. Moving on to looking at the nacelles here, they have a very basic build up of just two pieces which kind of just slap together, which does mean that there's a small seam which has to be sorted out, but come on, it's a 2 or 3 minute job, it's really not the end of the world. So the underside radiator, I believe that's a radiator, I could be wrong, gets cemented on the underside before then getting cemented to the rest of the fuselage. So in regards to how nacelles can sometimes be a little bit of a headache to put together, these actually went together really kind of hassle free. So now looking at the main radiator flaps here, it gives you that option to have them open or closed. I personally opted to have them open. If you are having them closed, it's a completely different assembly, just with different pieces. However, it's generally the same sort of build up. It's really quite a seamless sort of operation in regards to, it could have been a hell of a lot more complex, but Airfix managed to streamline that operation, which I was very thankful for. So now putting the ailerons on, there's some really nice attachment points here, which means they won't get broken off. I can't even tell you how many times I've just smacked off ailerons in modelling, so nice little touch. We can now see why we fitted that hub in the two halves of the fuselage, as these two sort of pieces, I don't know what to say, they're kind of circle pieces, slot into place on either side, and it gives you the ability to move them, as you can see, move the guns up and down if you really wanted to. I personally did then go ahead and cement them in the slightly tilted down position, as I don't like to play with my models. I'm not a child. But yeah, it's a cool little feature. Now having a look at something which I was kind of dreading going into this build was the glass. However, it was actually quite an easy little process. There's this main central part with two side pieces which can, you know, stick or cement onto it. I used ultra glue for this purpose, however you could use cement, just be careful not to fog them up, and it gives you a really nice sort of quite sturdy piece of glass. And the fit is exceptional, to be completely honest with you. There wasn't any gaps or anything, and I can't, you know, you can't really ask for much more in that sort of situation. The one thing that I would have loved to have had would be a mask set, as it is quite a complex canopy. So I had to get out my toothpick and masking tape and a very sharp blade and, you know, actually manually mask all of them off. I've been getting a little bit lazy lately using pre-cut mask sets. However, in these sorts of situations, you do really see the benefit of them. If you do get the model, I do highly recommend the model. It's a lot of fun. I would potentially get a mask set though, just as I don't think mine was as clean as it potentially could have been if I used, let's say, an Edouard's mask set. Looking at the exhaust stack now, it's nicely moulded, however you don't see a huge amount of it, as the Me410 has this kind of shroud which goes over the top of them. I'm not too sure what that is for actually. Is it for like deflecting dirt down so it doesn't go over the wing potentially? I don't know. Let me know if you know. But once that was done, that was pretty much this sort of you know, main assembly all sorted. I did spend a little bit of time cleaning up some seams, but you know, nothing to really worry about. Onto primer for this build, I'm going to be using Mr. Surfacer 1500 Black. That is my primer of choice at the moment, as I do really like how well it bonds to the plastic. When it comes to spraying, I was spraying it around about the 2 bar, so 28-ish PSI, I believe it is, or 30-ish PSI, and once again with a 0.3mm nozzle. Those are the settings which I find the most success out of. However, you might have different luck with other setups, so yeah, you know, also let me know what you run with. I am always interested to see how other people run their setups. But anyway, once that was all primed, it looked very, very menacing. Before I could go on to do the rest of the painting, I did actually have to get rid of one of my masks, as that panel wasn't meant to be masked, but I masked it anyway. So after that had been yanked off along with the antenna, I could then go on to use Mr. Colour C117, which is the Hella Blue or RLM 76 colour, which is used for the large majority of the underside and side of this build. When it comes to actual spraying technique that I'm going to be using here, you can see that I'm kind of using a black basing sort of technique where I'm highlighting the inside of a panel kind of, and then it will all get blended in later on. This gives the effect of some fake sort of shadows and a little bit of shading around some of the panel lines. I have used it before in models. I didn't do it too intensely here, purely because you're not going to see a lot of this under the mottling. But once I've highlighted the interiors of the panel, I'm going to be using a more diluted coat of RLM 76 to then blend everything in to give the semi-shaded or semi-worn looking effect. So when it comes to the numbers here, I was spraying at around about 14, 15 PSI, and the thinning ratio was around about 40-50% for the initial sort of, you know, close-up spraying, and then to blend everything in I put another few drops of thinner in, so maybe around about 55% thinner when blending everything in. That was the effect that gave me the best result on this build, however potentially a little bit too thick, which I tried to rectify later on. Once I was happy that the RLM 76 had all been sprayed down, I can do a little bit of masking and then use Mr. Colour C37, which is RLM 75. It's this really nice grey violet sort of colour, and that was sprayed down very monotonely, no special effects here, just trying to get a nice base sort of colour here. The reason I don't use any techniques in this part of the build is because there's going to be a, you know, splinter camo that goes on top of the wings, and it's very hard to make an effect look too nice and continuous when you're using such a harsh camo scheme in regards to harsh lines. Once that had been masked off, I can use C36, which is the RLM 74 grey-green colour, and once again, as I just said, it's sprayed down very monotonely. I did unfortunately spray a little bit too heavily in this region, and it left, I think, one little paint ridge, which I didn't notice until a little bit later on. So really, the moral of the story for this part of the build is going to be don't drown your model in paint, otherwise you might have quite a nasty looking paint ridge. If you do, you can using a really high grip sandpaper, sand it back, and it should get rid of a lot of it. But just try not to get one in the first place. After everything had been demasked, I was left with a very nice looking splinter camo on the top half of the wing, and now I need to attack that almost the spine of the Me410. This was all done freehand, as after looking at some reference images, it seemed that this part was far more soft in contrast to the really harsh splinter on the wings. So that of course meant no masking tape needed here. Just lowered the PSI down to about 10 or 12 PSI, thinned the paint a little bit more, and that gave me the ability to do some mottling. In regards to mottling, all I'm doing here is, once again, as I said, a more thinned paint, and I'm coming far closer to the model. That reduces some overspray. You can see that my mottling got a little bit better as I went on. I did the green first, and that had a little bit too much overspray, maybe potentially because my paint wasn't as thin as it should have been, and also it was maybe sprayed a little bit too far away. However, when I was doing the grey, I really dialed that in, and it looked far better. So learn from my mistakes, make sure that your paint is really nicely thinned, and also don't spray too far away. On a different note, I do suggest that you do a little bit of research into an Me410 before you actually spray down your camo, as the marking sheet is very good. However, when I looked at more photos of this Me410 in or a very similar Me410, I don't know if it was this one exactly, it had a slightly different looking mottle to what I had seen on the marking sheet, so I tried to replicate that, and it has a bit more of a strandy looking effect. I know that isn't very technical, but I hope you get what I mean. I found all of the mottling really enjoyable though, and it has tempted me to get a couple more German videos out on the channel. So if you see a storm of German aircraft on the channel, you know why. So here was the final mottled effect of the Me410. I was really quite happy with how this turned out. Definitely not perfect in any means, but you know, gets the effect, which is what I was happy about. I can then go on to use a couple of metallic colours now to pick out elements such as the big gun at the front, the machine guns on the side, the landing gear legs, all of that sort of stuff, just starting to do the final bits and pieces before I can move on to decals. Having a look at the landing gear now, these are really nice and beefy, which I really like. It's a reoccurring theme with Airfix kits. They all seem to have these really nice, big, bulky landing gear legs, which is great. It's absolutely great. It really gives you that ease of mind of your models, that they're not just going to collapse at any given point. The props can now go on as well. And really, that is everything put together. We can now go on to use some Mr. Colour GX100. This is just going to seal all of my hard work of the mottling in and keep it protected from any of the decal solutions and whatnot, which I'm going to be using in a second. This is sprayed on relatively wet. I'm still kind of working and trying to get to grips with how this stuff works incredibly well, and I did unfortunately have a little bit of dust get stuck under the varnish again. This happened on my Buccaneer video, so I think I'm just going to have to do a deep clean of my workbench because I have no idea where it comes from. I always clean the surface beforehand, but yeah, that then went on and it gave me a really nice surface to put the decals on. For decal solutions, I'm using the Ammo MIG just 102, which is a setter and softener solution. Works really well on these Airfix decals, helps them to, you know, go into all of those recessed details. The actual decals themselves are Airfix quality, no more really needs to be said, they're absolutely superb. However, me being a dipshit pretty much meant that I destroyed the prop spinner decals with some, you know, Ammo MIG setting solution. So I instead had to consult my good friend Matt, and he said that instead of using them, I should just do the half black, half white prop spinners instead. So thank you, Matt, you really did save me. Make sure to check him out at Raised Modelling. Thank you, Matt. With my small cock-up out of the way, I can now go on to do a bit of weathering. So the initial part of weathering, I'm just going to be giving the entire aircraft a wash. This is going to be Ammo MIG's enamel a dark wash. The normal procedure to get this thing on, so I'm going to use capillary action to draw it into all of the panel lines, let it dry, and then I'll use a clean cloth to wipe it away. This really helps to highlight all of those lovely details that Airfix spent the time to mould in. I'm now going to use some Abtoiling oils to do some more concentrated grime and dirt. These are predominantly going to be concentrated grime around where the crew access would be, so on the side of the fuselage where people would constantly be getting in and out, around some of the, you know, fuel ports or places like that. And to do that, first I'm just going to use a really small amount of oil, kind of stipple it along where I want it to be, use a round headed brush to kind of blend everything in to give that nice soft gradient. Any excess which I didn't like was pretty much just cleaned up using, once again, a dampened cotton bud in some white spirit, and really that was it. To capture a little bit of a more faded effect along some of the aspects of the model, I'm going to be using Abtoilen's white oil paint here, and what it does is it kind of gives this white filter over some of the paint to make it look more faded. After looking at some reference images, it seemed that these sort of regions along the spine of the aircraft is where the paint started to get a little bit faded. To really help sell this effect, you really need to make sure that all of this white is blended in properly. If not, it gives these weird white streaks which really don't look too brilliant. Sometimes to help blend everything in, I will douse my round-headed brush in a little bit of white spirit beforehand. However, do be careful, otherwise it could take off a little bit too much of the white. Now, to seal all my weathering in, I'm going to be using VMS's satin varnish. This is kind of dusted on, and it gets rid of that super shine that the GX100 gives. Once that had dried, I could then move on to have a look at the exhaust stains. So a first for me in this build, I'm going to actually be airbrushing on the exhaust stains. So to do this, I mixed up a really diluted batch of, I believe it was dark earth colour from Tamiya. I can't remember what XF colour that is. However, that was dusted on in the vague region that I really wanted the exhaust stain to be in. And then what I did is I mixed up a slightly darker batch using a little bit of grey, and then concentrated it along the insides of that pre-sprayed region. I was actually really happy with how that looked, and then the only thing to do was take the masks off and do some rigging. And that was this build finished. So I'd like to say a big thank you to Jadlam for sending me this model. If you need any modelling supplies like this kit or paints, etc., be sure to check them out. And without further ado, here are the final photos and videos of this model. So let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time, guys. Bye bye.